So welcome everybody to this PFP book launch, one of our many wonderful engagements with people who have been featured in our book or who have given us an endorsement or who's just a member of our community that we have a lot of admiration for. And today we have quite a few amazing people on this call. We do know that many people have registered who have not yet shown up, so we're hoping that they are also going to be showing up soon. But today is really an opportunity to explore this idea of school at the center of community. And it's under the whole idea for us here is to kind of explore how what we're doing through Partners for Possibility is achieving that vision or not. So we have many people on the call who are not familiar with Partners for Possibility, and therefore we are just going to show very briefly a 3-minute video of Partners for Possibility. That was the video that was made for the WISE Awards. So we're just going to give you a 2.5-minute introduction to Partners for Possibility for those of you who are not familiar with our work, and then we will go straight into the conversation. So enjoy.
Principals are not trained to run schools like businesses. You're a teacher today, and tomorrow you find yourself being a principal with very little, if no training.
Partners for Possibility bring business leaders and school principals in a reciprocal co-learning and co-action partnership, where they work together to deal with the significant issues facing under-resourced schools. School principals learn from business leaders about HR and IT and finance, and business leaders learn about life in an under-resourced community, how to get things done when you have very little direct control.
Got such an immense value from the program. I had no idea what was going on in schools. And then when you're closer to the system, you see the complexity of the problem. I think that my biggest contribution was to just listen and be a sounding board for the principal. He knew the answers. He needed a safe person to talk to and bounce ideas off and to feel that I had his back.
The innovation of the program for me is that instead of focusing on curriculum and results, it's focusing on the development of the person that drives curriculum and results. Principals are not there to be fixed. Principals are there to be supported. I've seen how the Partners for Possibility program has built confidence in the principals and equipped them for their role as leaders in the school in creating a healthy organization.
The program is designed for scale. It is very easy for us to roll this out in tiny rural towns across South Africa because we can tap into the local assets, the local business leaders who understand that community and who care about that community. We are healing our country. So that's just so that we're all on the same page about what we are doing and the work. For anybody who's interested in the statistics, those figures are slightly out of date. We have so far worked with 1,350 principals. We've been doing this work for the last 10 years. Our theory of change is built on the idea that educators need the support of people and communities around them, and that school leaders need to learn how best to enroll people to support the school. So for those of you who are not in South Africa, most school principals in South Africa have been promoted to be principals after being a classroom teacher, and they haven't necessarily been equipped with the knowledge and skills to lead complex organizations and mobilize the support of the other adults in the community. So what we are excited about is just where that, as a result of Partners for Possibility, where that has starting to happen and how it's starting to happen. And our new book is full of stories of this kind of impact and examples of community businesses and principals who've been working together to mobilize communities around the school. So we have with us this afternoon, as I said, 4 amazing thought leaders. All of these people are people that I would love to spend hours and hours and hours with. We've only got limited time. We're going to make the most of that time. And my first request was to just get all these thought leaders to just introduce themselves to us and to everybody on the call, so that you can just have a sense of them. Now we have a mix of South African people and then people from other countries. And so even though most of us know Professor Jansen well, he will be the first one to speak, there are some people from other countries who don't know him. So Professor Jansen is one of our, he needs none of the South African people would want to have any introduction to him. They know him well, but for the international guest, he's a national treasure and an educational guru. He's a prolific writer. I would strongly recommend that you have a look at his books. One of the books that made a massive impact on my life is the book called Knowledge in the Blood. All his books are worth reading, and he's referenced and quoted many times in the new PFP book. So Professor Jansen, just imagine that these people don't know who you are, and if you could just introduce yourself to the people on this call, and also tell us a little bit around how did you find out about Partners for Possibility? What's your connection with Partners for Possibility?
Thank you very much, Louise. It is an enormous honor to be with your distinguished guest, and I want to also say welcome to our international colleagues. It's absolutely fantastic. I still believe that the best learning happens when we talk across borders of all kinds, including geographic borders. And so I was very excited by how you brought people together. I suppose if first of all, you always say really nice things about me, Louise, and my kids will have a different view. I don't think of myself in very high terms, to be honest with you. My primary identity is that of a teacher, and I still teach. I teach in schools when I get opportunity, and I still teach an undergraduate class at university, even though I don't have to. But that's my primary identity. Now, of course, there's other things I do. I write academic books that are boring, and I busy training every year 30 to 40 young senior lecturer equivalent academics to become future professors in the academy in South Africa. And so all of that stuff, boards, science councils, all that nonsense. But what I treasure is my civic life, my civic duty. And so when the pandemic hit, it was very important for me to join hands with you and Canterbury Primary and any number of other schools to make sure their children had food, to make sure that learners were heard. We just put out a book that I'm very proud of called Learning Under Lockdown. And it's a book of 400 stories of children, and boy, what an exciting project that was. And it's out there, 99.95 cents at CNA. Please make your way over there. we literally printed that book for free, to be honest with you. And all the money from that goes into a fund to support school nutrition programs around the country. So I enjoy that. I enjoy calling up a principal, in what's his place? His name is outside East London, and just to encourage her because somebody said this principal feels alone. One of those big girls' schools in, just forget that. And you just speak to the principal for half an hour, and I connected to a principal in Pinelands, to Ann Morton, and there you go, a mentorship. So I don't know, I find great joy in doing those things with you, with your colleagues. And that is much more important to me than my new book on curriculum theory, which only 7 people will read, including my family. And so on. So that's who I am, that's what I do. And I think just to conclude, why I am attracted to Partners for Possibility is because I like simple, things. South Africans tend to really make very simple things very complicated, like trying to fly a plane in this bloody country, I mean, SAA yet again, we mess up things. And here comes Louise and a team with a simple idea that is also a very powerful idea, and that is also, sorry Louise, a very persistent idea. It is, I mean, think of this proposition. Can you think of a more simple proposition that is also at the same time so powerful, that when business leaders get together with educational leaders in the context of schools, things happen? And I just want to give you, as I always do, a huge shout out, Louise, for your persistence in pushing this powerful idea. You don't need to read these, educational research is all over the place. I can give you 10 different opinions of the relationship between class size and student achievement. I mean, it's just all over the place, but it's agreed on one thing, it's unequivocal on one thing, and that is the centrality of the role of the school leader and leadership in bringing about change. And that is my attachment to this project. And until you kick me out, I will still be punting your simple, powerful, and persistent idea.
Thank you so much, Prof. And for those of you who have a copy of the book, I would recommend that you have a look at that beautiful endorsement we got from Professor Janssen. The last one, he was kind of a bit tough on me. So this one, he wasn't so tough on me in the endorsement. Thanks, Prof. We're going to hear more from Professor Janssen later. I want to introduce you now to Dr. Santiago Rincon-Galaria. He is joining us from Canada. He's originally from Mexico. He was my find this year at the ICSI conference in Morocco. When I heard him speak, I knew why I needed to go, because I wasn't so sure, but I knew the moment I heard him speak. I got his book, Liberating Learning, Educational Change as Social Movement. I would strongly recommend that book as well. It is an absolute must read. I was so inspired. After coming back from Morocco, I still had to write that final chapter in the new book, and he inspired me. So I had to bring him in some way. So I referenced him in the last chapter, and his work around deep learning and the pedagogical core, which I'm hoping we're going to hear about, we want to hear from. But just firstly, Santiago, welcome, and maybe just for everybody who don't know you, to just get a little bit of a sense. And when he says he works with Michael Fullan, for those of you who don't know, Michael Fullan is one of these guru people, and Michael Fullan is also the link between Jonathan Janssen and Santiago, because they have met somewhere along the line. So over to you, Santiago.
Thank you so much, Louis, and such a pleasure to interact with you, to share the stage, so to speak, with you, Dr. Jonathan Janssen. I'm a big fan of your work and the contribution you're making to help us build more humane societies. So what should I say about myself? I'm calling from Toronto. I've been living in the city of Toronto, Canada, for the past 10 years. This is where my wife lives, and that's why I live here. I spent many years working in Mexico, supporting grassroots pedagogical innovation initiatives that ended up spreading like wildfire across the entire educational system in Mexico, from 8 schools to about 9,000 schools in the course of 8 years. And that's at the core. This kind of work is at the core of what I do, both as a researcher, as an academic, but also as an organizer, as an educator, etc. The core question guiding my work is centered around a very simple idea and a very simple proposition. And the proposition is that learning is a practice of freedom. That's the core of my beliefs around the work I do as an educator and the work I'd like to support. And at the same time, I do know by personal experience, but by all we know about the role of schooling in our societies, that learning as a practice of freedom is a very rare occurrence in our classrooms and in our schools. So most of my work is devoted to trying to understand how to liberate learning across entire educational systems, all the way from classrooms to entire societies. That's been most of the work I've been doing over the past couple decades. And I have a special fondness for the global South, coming myself from Mexico and having grown up in Mexico City and traveling around the country doing a lot of educational work in some of the most remote, some of the most historically marginalized communities around the country. I came to gain a deep appreciation for what the Global South has to offer us when it comes to not reproducing or replicating conventional schooling, but when it comes to reimagining what education can look like when focused on the basic idea of learning as a practice of freedom. So that's the overarching sense of what I do. That's my main focus, trying to understand how we can liberate learning across entire educational systems with a special focus on those who have been historically marginalized. How did I learn about Partners for Possibility? Basically, and I think Jonathan Johnson will relate to this, and possibly the same with Michael and Jenny. Louise made her way to my attention in a very forceful yet very gentle way when we met in Marrakesh. She came to one of the presentations that a master class that I was leading with Michael Fullen and another colleague, Dr. Jean Clinton. And she heard me speak to someone from Marrakesh who I had agreed to go for breakfast with the next day. And she very gently and very kindly, but again, very forcefully said, well, can I join the breakfast? And with a big smile. So that made it impossible for us to say no. And we invited her. And you know, what was at the beginning, 30-minute plan ended up extending by more than 2 hours. We ended up spending a lot of time on the sunny morning in Marrakesh, talking about the work that she's been doing, Partners for Possibility, etc. That was the first thing that drew my attention. I mean, what I could see in Louise was a sense of purpose and determination that's hard to find in many, especially in research conferences, etc., etc. But Louise came to me just knowing that she had something very important to show, not only to me, but to the world. And when I see that sense of persistence and determination, that draws my attention right away. I mean, I don't think I've met a more determined person in this year than Louise. And that was the first thing that caught my attention. But at the same time, there are a couple of things that I think those of us who work on the educational change field, which is the field that has, produced ideas and knowledge around how schools improve, and that tries to also support school improvement. Those of us in the educational change field, have neglected one fundamental component of school improvement, which is the role of communities. That's been a neglected area for those of us in the educational change field, and Partners for Possibility is doing that. So that's at the first kind of most superficial level of why I'm drawn to this event and to the book and to the work of Partners for Possibility. They're bringing attention to a neglected area for those of us in the educational change field. But the most appealing thing for me is not that they're doing that, but how they're doing it. They're doing it with a simple idea, as Professor Jansen was saying, a very simple idea, which is bring together business leaders and school leaders and get them to work together to solve the most pressing problems faced by the school. But make sure that this partnership, that when business leaders come into the school, they don't do it as condescending donors or as patronizing bosses, as people coming from the top helping the poor dears below. They join in as learning partners, as working together towards a common goal. And that's priceless. That's phenomenal. I think that's where the magic happens. I'll talk more to this. I'll speak more to this when when we have a little bit more time. But this very simple idea with a very persistent, as Dr. Jansen is saying, very persistent leadership makes this a very appealing, very appealing example that we should be paying a lot of attention to. I'll speak more to this in a moment, but these are my opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Santiago. I hope Santiago is also going to tell you the story about how this idea of of people from other countries crossing borders and getting interested has changed his life and has had an impact on his life. Thank you. I'm getting private messages from all my colleagues saying, oh no, I understand why you feel like this about Santiago. So mutual appreciation between us, a real privilege and pleasure to have you with us today, Santiago. The next person I want to introduce is Jenny Lewis. So Jenny is in Australia. It's midnight in Australia. When I asked her about this, she immediately said yes, despite the fact that she knew it was going to be midnight for her to be part of this. She's a fellow member of the WISE All In community. All In is the leadership, the community of people who are working specifically in leadership development that WISE is convening. And she's just, you know, I have so much to say about Jenny, but the words I wanted to use to describe her is she's wise, generous, kind, and very knowledgeable, specifically about the role of school leaders. So Jenny, we will hear from you again. The initial part is just an introduction from you around the kind of work you do and why have you been inspired by Partners for Possibility?
Perfect. Oh, so very early morning to everybody. So just a little bit about me. I have been a teacher and a school principal. I have been in charge of our National School Leadership Centre, the Australian Council for Educational Leaders. And I've been a past CEO of the International Congress for School Effectiveness and Improvement, ICSE. And in my role, Jonathan, as the CEO of the Commonwealth Council for Education Administration and Management, CCAM, we have crossed our paths before, and through the work that EMASA was doing in South Africa, I had helped EMASA with some work there. In that Commonwealth role, I also worked with Namibia and many areas of South Africa, including the Matthew Gonowi Leadership Centre. So I have a passion for working in those wonderful regions. My current work is as a government advisor, particularly around principal standards and teacher standards and supervisor standards, and that whole alignment and coherence in terms of building shared language across the system. So I'm an advisor to the Indonesian government, the Philippines government, and those stunning, wonderful, resilient islands in the Pacific, of which many are in the Commonwealth. So working with those. And in my pathways in all this different work is how I've met Louise, of course. And when you hear Louise talk, and you understand my background, we were just like two peas in a pod, as we would say, and just talking the same concepts about how schools can transform and change with others that are interested in the same learning journey. So when I hear Louise say words like healing our country, and I would put through education and building that compelling model for change that's inclusive and agile. I know I'm in with spirits of the same mind, that through the hearts and minds of the communities and our schools and our children, we can make better futures. And through business, their research and practice is usually about 10 years ahead in some ways. So learning a lot from the current work in flourishing organisational theory and things like that. Conceptually, I can see is the same work that Louise is leading with Partners for Possibility. So thank you, Louise, for having me here, and I look forward to learning from everybody on the call.
Thank you so much, Jenny. The next person, and again, I'm sure you can all start to get a feel for the quality of the people on this call. The next person and it's our last kind of formal contributor, is Professor Michael Romanovsky. So he's a professor at the College of Education at Qatar University. A few years ago, or I can't remember the date, last year, he was asked by WISE, so we're a WISE Awards winner, you saw that video earlier. He was asked by WISE, by Dr. Asma, to write a case study about Partners Possibility. So he came to visit us and he met quite a few people. And we've loved having him here. We're hoping to have the case studies published soon. But for today, we just want to kind of get a sense as to what kind of work he does and why have you said yes to this invitation, Michael?
Oh, thank you very much for having me today. Yeah, most of the research that I do recently, and I've been in Qatar for the last 13 years, is I focus a lot on programs, policy borrowing, policy transferring. Most of the time we see, especially in Qatar, is policies are brought in from the West and then kind of shoehorned into different programs without considering the local or indigenous view. And then we see many of them take these educational theories and they eventually fail. And so right now I'm opening with the College and Educational Research Center that's going to start doing more of the research within the country and be able to localize those findings so that we hope that those findings will be sustainable. But what happened with Weiss is I was asked to go to Weiss. I was asked to go to South Africa to look at the program. When I first heard business and education, I became very, very skeptical. I thought, oh boy, you know, here we go. The business world is going to come in and tell education what to do. And I thought, now I got to get on a plane and fly 9 hours to see that take place, you know. Well, then I was shocked when I got there, and I became a believer rather quickly, because one of the things that I think is very, very important is when programs take solid educational theory and sociological theory and bake them into the programs, and they work very well. Because what happens is then those programs are sustainable. And I don't mean sustainable in the sense that financially, I mean sustainable in that these people are going to take those and begin to move those and impact so many lives. And I think one of the best, I remember asking Lois a question, is what type of resistance do you have from the principals? And she said, none. And then we began to talk about what they use is they use Pablo Freire's view of that local bottom-up perspective, and how it reduces standardization. It's not a one size fits all, and the local communities begin to develop the needs of the school. And that's essential. I mean, what happens, I deal with education reforms all over the world, and what I see, 99% of them when I visit, is it's a top-down mandated reform that's not going to work. This is the complete opposite. So that's why I'm here tonight, because this is a program that's built, it's baked in, that system, that's what's going to last. And these skills and this idea of the community developing the reform to fit each one of their special needs is what's so unique. And I'll talk more about that later on. But like I said, when I went there, very skeptical, got on the plane and was thrilled to see a program that is so much different than most of the reforms I see. So it's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Michael. And now you can all imagine how that makes me feel to hear that. So just for the purpose of the people who are not from South Africa, I want to share just a little bit of background about our context, just so that you can get a better understanding about what we're up to. So more than 80% of the principals in South Africa are principals who've been appointed to lead complex organization without any preparation for their tasks. So they're classroom teachers who know how to teach, and then they're promoted to lead and manage a complex organization with limited resources. So we have very small schools with, you know, three to four teachers, and then we have 200 learners, and very large schools. Some of our schools have 2,000 learners with 50 teachers. But in our rural and areas and small schools, our principals are expected to lead a complex organization and teach in the classroom. So it's a very tough, tough environment. And our reality is not different from many countries in the global South. So a few weeks ago, we had the WISE conference about school leadership, and an important outcome of the session, which is exactly the same outcome as the session I attended earlier today about the Education Commission, was that school leaders, the role of school leaders is changing, and that a key part of the role in future will be to facilitate collaboration between all the adults who care about the children in their communities. And that's the work that we've been doing for the last 10 years. So because it's hard to evaluate the multifaceted impact of this work, we have decided to write a book. And we've captured 40 stories about principals and leaders who've been applying what they've learned through PFP. And we've discovered how important and insightful it is for those of us who are doing the work of PFP to hear from people who have an outsider view of our work, because it's through their eyes we're discovering something that is not easily available to us who are in the trenches. So, so the first person I'm going to ask to talk a little bit about just this outsider-in perspective on South Africa is Santiago, but he has a personal story about that outsider perspective on his work and his life. And he gave us a very special endorsement. So I'm going to ask him to say a little bit more about that, but then also this whole idea of education change, social movements, this idea of, you know, why would people in the global north be interested in the global south? Because for so long, the message we've been getting is you guys just need to, you know, keep doing what you're doing there in your little project in the global south. And then this for the people on our team on this call, this idea of the pedagogical core as two learners who are working together in the presence of, anyway, Santiago, over to you. You have blown my mind last time when you spoke, so.
Thank you very much, Luis. And I will try to stick to the impossible task of speaking about all those things in 6 minutes. So I'll time myself and see how we do. I find it very telling and very moving that it is today that we are connecting and talking about Partners for Possibility. You will see I'm wearing an orange shirt. And in Canada, I do that because today, September 30th, is Orange Shirt Day in Canada. And it is a day to remember residential schooling, which was a government-led agenda to separate Indigenous children from their parents and from their communities, and to indoctrinate them into the beliefs of the colonizer. It has been residential schooling. The last residential school was closed about 25, 30 years ago. So it's very, very close to us, very, very close in time to where we live right now. And it has been recognized as an act of cultural genocide. I find it very telling that we're connecting here, because Canada a few years ago started a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to try to repair the harm that was inflicted upon Indigenous communities, First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities, and the children that were subject to tremendous abuse by a system that was trying to erase their memory. So I find it very telling that we are meeting in this day, because I think we are living in times when reconciliation will have to be a fundamental part of the work we do. We live in times when nothing less than the human project is at stake. Before COVID hit, we had already started to get some glimpses into the tremendous dehumanizing effects that so many of the ways we lead our community, our economy and our societies was having. And I think the pandemic is just bringing those more to the surface. And so nothing less than humanity is at stake right now. And if we don't pay attention to that specifically and intentionally and with our full attention, the default will be further dehumanization. And I think there's nothing more important that we can do than making sure that we come out of this pandemic with a more humane society, with the societies and economies that are cultivating the best of our humanity. And that's why, again, I believe it's very telling that it's in this day that we are connecting. Someone living in Canada with this amazing community of leaders in South Africa. So let me just let's connect. Let me just connect this idea of humanity being at stake with the work that Partners for Possibility is doing. Michael was talking about how skeptical he was about, when listening to the idea of business helping schools. And Michael Full and myself talk about this as the problem of as the situation of the helping hand strikes again. Right? And how damaging that has been to many schools, well-intentioned business leaders that end up messing up schools more than helping them. And I just want to point out that the conventional top-down division that has framed how we run our organizations and our societies, all the way from classrooms to schools, to school systems, to nations, is not only tremendously ineffective. There is no example of a very successful and sustainable, fully top-down initiative. Not in the classroom, not in a school, not in a school system, not in a society. It may produce some good results for some years, but it's not sustained. Top-down is not only something that we need to move away from because it's ineffective, but also because it's dehumanizing. When you establish a vertical separation between one who tells you what you have to do and the one below that's expected to do what you have to do, you're dehumanizing. You're establishing yourself as superior to another human being. And that's damaging to humanity. And this is a way in which we have been organizing our life in classrooms and school systems and societies. Again, that's not only dysfunctional, but it's dehumanizing. When I talk about the pedagogical core, which is something that Luis asked me to talk about, I talk about it because I think that's one of the fundamental units that we need to intervene. And the pedagogical core is fundamentally the connection, the relationship between an educator and a learner in the presence of knowledge, of an object of knowledge. And that's a basic unit. It's fully agreed upon in the educational field. That's the basic unit where learning happens or not. And what we know is that learning, powerful learning, occurs not in relationships that are like this, of top-down separation between the one who knows and the one who doesn't, between the one who tells what has to be done and the one who has to comply with what the authority is saying. Learning thrives in relationships that are like this. They are relationships of dialogue, of mutual learning, of mutual influence, where both persons are influencing and changing each other. That's where the magic happens. That's where learning happens. So that's one of the basic reasons why changing the pedagogical core is so important. But it's important as well because that's where you build democracy. Imagine what kind of mindsets and behaviors and attitudes you cultivate when you're a subject, or you subject those below you to basically sit quietly, listen to what you have to say, and to comply with your directions. Even no matter how well-intentioned the person here on top might be and how caring, and if this is the nature of the connection, what you cultivate is the mindsets and the behaviors and the attitudes that you need to sustain authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, right? That's what you serve. If you want to cultivate robust democracies, what we need to build in our everyday activities, what we do in the classrooms, in our schools, in our connection with school, in our school systems, in our societies, is cultivate connections between state and citizen, between school leader and teacher, between teacher and student, that are not like this. They are like this. They're learning partnerships, connections where we both learn from each other and we support each other's learning and growth. That's what is at stake. And the beautiful thing about Partners for Possibility is that it's bringing this basic notion of changing in fundamental ways the nature of of the interaction between business leaders and school leaders and schools, so that what they build is phenomenal learning partnerships where both are learning from each other, where business leaders and school leaders are confronting problems that no one has a clear answer to, where they both need to bring out their best of their capital, not only financial, but social, intellectual, their networks, in the service of the most pressing needs of the schools. This is not only school improvement, this is nation building at its best. It is nation building, and it is in building the nation at the level of the personal interaction between sectors that have historically not been speaking or learning from each other. At the core of this work is fundamental, profound cultural change. And when I talk about moving beyond top-down separation and more into learning, mutual learning, or learning partnerships where both parts are learning and changing each other, requires deep and fundamental cultural change. Let me say just very briefly, because I'm aware I'm now well past my 6 minutes, but that's the nature of the work we have to do. It's deep and widespread cultural change. We need to change in fundamental ways our beliefs and our everyday practice as we interact with those we work with. Now, throughout history, the most amazing and effective, vehicles for widespread cultural change have not been bureaucracies, but social movements. It is in the logic of operation of social movements that I think we can find many of the clues as to how to sustain, trigger, sustain, and spread the changing culture that we need in our schools, in our classrooms, and across our societies. The book that Luis mentioned briefly, Liberating Learning, Educational Change as a Social Movement, tries to articulate a theory of action that basically brings in the best we know about how effective social movements operate and bring it into our agenda to change education by liberating learning. That's the basic idea. Let me stop there. I'm guessing there will be some opportunity to talk a little bit more, but these are the core ideas that I wanted to leave in here. At some point, I'd like to talk more about what Partners for Possibility is teaching us about equity and about resourcefulness, but I think we can leave that for later. Let me just say, this is a phenomenal example from the Global South that not only the Global South has to learn from, the Global North has to learn from it as well. I think there are lots of things, again, across the Global South that are leading the way in creating more humane societies through education. And I think Partners for Possibility is one of such examples. I'm very excited to start this connection with Luis and the work of Partners for Possibility, and also about finding ways in which we can work together to increase the visibility of the work you're doing, to bring in some inputs from what we have learned about school improvement and system improvement around the world, and to grow together and learn together about the possibilities of this phenomenal work. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Santiago. This is just, as you can all hear, there's so much more. So what I want to encourage you to do is, if you have specific questions that you'd like to talk about, or if you want to just, so there's a note from Magali here to say thank you for words that resonate so deeply. So if you do have any thoughts or responses to what you've just heard, please share that, because it's a kind of act of generosity to Santiago, who's blessing us with his presence, but also just to acknowledge and a way of making sense. As you all know, that's one of the ways in which we think we develop a new understanding, is to actually just articulate what we're thinking. So thank you so much. The next person to speak is Professor Jansen. So in his endorsement, Prof, I see if you could, just want to check that you are with us still, because your video is just, oh, there you go. So he said in the endorsement that the single most important factor in school change is the role of the school principal. So I want to hear more about that perspective, Prof, because for 10 years, we've been arguing that. It's only in the last year or so that people have started to recognize that we have to invest in the development of principals. We are going to ask you, Prof, to go slightly closer to your computer so that we can hear you. You've got such a beautiful voice and we didn't hear it well enough earlier. And anything else that you want to share with us about this? And this idea of equity is a really hot topic for you and me. So if there was something you could say about equity, that would be fabulous. And yeah.
Thank you very much. I really wish you had just kept Santiago on, and I was just a spectator, because I learned so much in the past few minutes. Wow, that was amazing. Look, I grew up in an evangelical church, not the really happy clappy ones. We were sort of more, reserved, if you will, very English. But nevertheless, you could tell an evangelical church from the mainstream churches by the degree of enthusiasm, of the participants, of the followers, and so on, and the willingness to to swing from a chandelier. But I'm always amazed, as happened in the chat room, when I meet people associated with Partners for Possibility. They like bloody evangelicals. They're excited. They want to save you, if you know what I mean. And that is a consequence of Louise's leadership. That is a consequence of a culture that has been developed in Partners for Possibility. I mean, it's one thing to train principals technically, to do their jobs, or for principals and business people to share audit reports or what have you. It's a completely different thing. As the principal of Oudemolin, who was in our chat group, just shared, I asked her, what is the one big thing you want to change at your school? And if I may paraphrase, she said, basically, I need to get my teachers enthused, excited, so that they begin to see the children in a completely different way, not as deficits in a technical high school, but as young people with enormous possibility, you know, for change. And so this is, I think, what attracts me to Partners for Possibility, is you are able to generate an excitement. And that is especially required now for principals. I want to flip the argument a little bit from going to what principals need to do to just talking for a minute or two about where principals are in our country at the moment, and indeed, I would argue around the world. We seldom talk, Louise and colleagues, about the emotional lives of principals, but you know, we completely forget that a principal, a leader, whether you're leading a school or a university for that matter, you're going to show up with your game face every single morning, even though you are scared because of COVID-19, even though you're afraid that you might take the virus home, so to speak, to vulnerable family members. But you've got to show up, because that's what leaders do, especially in a crisis. You have to, you know, manage the routines of performance, like these ridiculous grade 11 and 12 exams, which, you know, if you ever wanted to mislead people in South Africa, you change the name of an exam and you call it a you know, controlled test. What nonsense. It's still an exam. Why do we have these things? The kids are stressed out. The principal now has to manage these routines of performance, okay, as if nothing happened, as if there wasn't a pandemic, and so on, as if teachers did not end up on ventilators, etc., and die in some cases, and so on. And yet, there you are as a principal, and your emotional life is under such stress because you have to console parents. You have to be the go-between between a department, as my friend Mr. Newman is discovering at Heathfield High School. You've got to be the go-between between what you think is best for your school and what the department thinks, the government department thinks is best, you know, for 25,000, 26,000 schools around the country. You have to absorb as a leader the emotional stress of your staff, you know, of both your teachers, the workers, etc., and pretend to be normal, etc. I cannot think, Louise, of a more opportune, I don't think of any NPO, any NGO, whatever you call yourself, that is better place to bring that conversation to the real world right now between our business partners and our schools, and just for a moment put the accounting balance sheet somewhere else, just for a moment put the CAPS curriculum coverage somewhere else, and just talk to principals as emotional beings, as vulnerable people, as concerned human beings. And you know, I'm very skeptical of the corporate world. I'll just put my my anti-capitalist sort of sentiments out there. But you know what I have really enjoyed over the years watching the corporate leaders is the way in which they are respectful towards the principals. They sit there and they listen to them. Louise, if I may encourage PFP in these times, just ask our corporate leaders just to sit after school for an hour and not talk the normal business, we'll get to that, and just help principals emotionally. Let them talk, as you saw in that beautiful video of yours, and let them have a sense that they're being listened to. I also have another challenge, Louise, and I'd like us to start planning this tomorrow. So we've got a book out called Learning Under Lockdown, okay, for kids. I'm working with some Mitchell Splain teachers on a book called Teaching Under Lockdown. Can I ask all of you on this show today, and I'd love Santiago and Jenny and Michael to perhaps also consider this. How about we put together, maybe from each of our country contexts, 20 principal stories each of leading under lockdown? How about that? How about making prominent, and of course, bringing your model, Louise, into that frame, because we don't learn alone, as Santiago so beautifully put it. We don't lead alone, and boy, do we need each other right now to make those connections. Thank you.
So yes, the answer is yes, Prof. I'm sure between us we'll be able to make that happen. I do want to say to you that's been the big discovery for the business leaders during this time, is that this was not a time for answers. This is a time to just be present and to provide that emotional support and to let the principals know how much they're valued and appreciated. And quite a few principals who have been part of Fairplay during this time are on the call. So if any of those principals want to say something about their experience, we would love to hear from you in the chat. I now want to give Jenny an opportunity to share, and Jenny, you can share your screen if you want to, but just from your perspective, contribution to this conversation. So where's Jenny?
Asked me, there we are. To just reflect a little bit more about the book and what the whole partnership might be. So I hoping you can see the screen, Louise.
There you go. We can see it now.
Shifting to good to great.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, we can.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So just to put a perspective on very, very quickly, because I think to have some more time with our other speakers would be really helpful, and I can forward this to you, is that what we're seeing not only in the PF4P work, it's also what this movement is doing. It's been highlighted so much in the WISE work, in the UNESCO work, in the Commonwealth work, and in the Global Education Leaders Program work. I can see the same pattern. So I thought I'd synthesize those for you, because there is this shifting from good to great in this partnership. So it's always
Jenny,
future focused.
So
yes?
we can't see the good to great now. We're seeing some other documents. So the good to great picture has disappeared. So maybe you may want to just
How's
stop.
that?
There you go. Now we can see.
There it is. Okay, very, very good. So, all these partnerships have had a very strong focus on this, future focused, very strong values platform. And that's been articulated in all the reforms we're seeing, and very, very centred in Louise and her team's work. Personable and a very strong empathy between the school leaders and the business leaders and the community. Very strong pathway of clarity, because if people don't know what they're doing and it's not explicit, then it's not easy to do, and really putting first things first. What we're seeing not only through COVID, but through Partners for Possibility all the time, is that leadership is not confined in bubbles. And we're hearing a lot of bubble stories in different countries at the moment, in safe bubbles, but we know that when you can see leadership, it will be through things like impact, compassion, standards, and being a member of many. So this community of practices that we're seeing flourishing across South Africa and in other countries is remarkable. There's recognised that in these new learning times, there's new pathways, but everybody that is being successful is also very, very, very authentic. So that ongoing authoritative but authentic journey is being really important. But we're also seeing, and it's been explicit in the stories that I've read in the book, that roles and responsibilities and the recognition of equivalence is really significant. So this empowerment from the bottom up is thriving in many of the stories we saw in the book, but it's thriving in these international communities. And the people that have led the change out of much tragedy at the moment are not the ones that are usually formally appointed. But we're in this, what would you call it, second loop of learning, if not the third loop at the moment. And so many of us are having this conversation, as you have been having all the time, of a living evaluation. What's working, what's not working, what didn't work in the first lockdown that we need to make effective as we move into the second lockdown, what's thriving, not thriving. So those sorts of things have been a significant part of this. And I'll certainly make sure that you have these slides, but the main headings that have been is really schooling systems and structures being reimagined. And you have been reimagining for a number of years through Louise's leadership. The agility of different sorts of technologies and technology communication materials, much not anticipated as they have thrived before. What's the learning design looking like? So in this book, learning design, as in the first book, has been explored differently in different journeys. And what's that looking now as a result of the latest tragedies? As Jonathan says, let's capture them because they are extraordinary journeys. And what does that look like in terms of connections and connected communities? And how can we make that now enabling for future generations, not just current? What are we going to formalize now that we now know students can do, families can do, communities can do, because they had to? The boundary from school to community has well and truly been taken down because of COVID. But what are the things that we've found as a result of COVID? And we're seeing in these diverse communities where people are choosing to do school differently, that students are saying they want to learn in different ways. So many students have marched with their feet. As long as they've got the materials that they need to be learning about, just leave me alone, thank you, and I'll learn from home and I'll go into school when I need to. From students with disabilities, students that are autistic, students that were learning 2 years ahead of the peers in the class, there's been a remarkable learning journey for everyone. So here in Australia, some schools are now doing 2 days of school as we would know it, and teachers planning for the week and taking students through different projects that they'll be working on. They're taking Wednesday as a weekend day, and then Thursday and Friday the students work from home on the things that they've learnt about and been set tasks to do on the Monday, and they can phone in or Zoom in to talk to their teacher at any time on that Thursday and Friday. So the whole structure of education is being challenged at the moment. And one of the things that I think the engagement for us is that what Louise enabled us to do in partnerships is that we've now got some baseline stories that have been proven, that have now, these new journeys been articulated. And I think that's a powerful time to have another discussion. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Ooh, we could spend a lot more time. I do want to encourage you. We're going to hear from Michael now, and then there will be a little bit of an opportunity for a more engaging conversation with everybody to start to share your thoughts, your questions, what you want to talk about, if we have a few more minutes in the chat. But before we do that, let's give Michael an opportunity to just share a little bit. Michael, so as you've said, you've studied many things, you came to South Africa, maybe a little bit more around what you've seen that's been so inspiring for you, and why should be interested in what we're doing, and anything else from you?
Yeah, sure. I think when I think about my own background, I grew up in the States in poverty. And so I have an understanding as I look back on, and it's interesting when I look back, I look as a professor and I look back at theoretically what I went through. And one of the things that I've always seen is that students in poverty are disadvantaged because they don't have access to the social capital that other people have. And this impacts their education outcomes, their achievements, attendance, et cetera. And the thing I like about the program is what it does is it takes social capital and builds it in an incredible way. And this is a permanent thing. And you have to understand, when people have access to social capital, especially the principals, because students don't have the access to social capital, the principal is the only one that can provide that for the schools. And when you see the principals begin to access that, and I saw it firsthand, there's which is amazing. You can see how it's built into the system. That's going to last a while. And what it does is it creates equality. It reduces those disadvantages and those gaps, because there's really three types of social capital that we're dealing with. And the first one it deals with kind of a structural social capital. And social capital really is, it's really not what I know, it's who I know. That's a quick way of summing it up to some degree. But there's this structural social capital that you saw, where business leaders meet with principals and they can meet some of the structural needs. You know, you saw buildings being built, a variety of different things that changes the schools, the school climates, et cetera. And that's important, you know, and you began to see not only that allowed communities to come in, because they say, hey, what's going on here? There's something happening here, and it's changing, and it's changing the community. But there's another social capital, cognitive social capital, that I like, because what happens is this is where thinking starts to change. And there's a verse in the scriptures that I really like, and it talks about, as iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another. And that's what you really have here. You have these business leaders coming in, not telling them, and we talked about earlier, and I don't need to repeat, not saying here's what you do, but they're sharpening one another. And what you saw is these networks being built, their attitudes, their values, their beliefs, and they begin to start changing their views, and they develop this culture or this view that becomes mutually beneficial to the community. Because you saw business leaders who talked to me who said, you know, I was never on that side of the tracks. They never saw it. Now their world is open. And so you saw principals sharpening business leaders sharpening principals, mutually coming together with the same purpose in changing schools. And that now, you know, that's incredible. I mean, as a professor, one of my goals obviously is to change people's thinking, because it lasts. This is what the program does that I think is essential. It changes people thinking on both sides of the situation, because when we talk about social class or social capital, it's haves and have-nots many times. So it changes both sides of that thinking, and it begins to reduce that. And you reduce those differences to get collective action. You've got to bring those people together. And that's what the program does. And then finally, and this mentions on the idea of emotional things, what you saw is these principals and business leaders becoming friends. You know, this is the relationship or the relational social capital, where you begin to see this idea of they build trust on one another, they have expectations, they build respect with one another, they have friendships. And remember, this doesn't just stay in the school. It starts going out into community. It goes to the parents. It starts moving to other schools. And so I think, as Santiago said, this changes the nation. It does. And it changes the nation, not, you know, in an incredible way, because it's, like I said earlier, it's from the bottom up. So if you take that bottom up theory and you see how social capital is being used in that program, you can really see that this is a program that be long-term. You'll look, you know, when I'm dead and gone, you'll look back and say, hey, wait, this is where it started, and look at where it is now. And so this is a program, and I'm going to be honest with you, I've looked at many, many programs, and this is one that has these two components for me, which I think are essential for good programs to last and to really make changes in people's lives. And the best part, I think, is when you go and you hear the stories of how students' lives are changed, how principals' lives are changed, when you see that, then you realize how social capital bottom up and how this program is changing lives. I think the best story was the one when the little girl and they go to Germany, and they come back and she wants to study German. She wants to go to school in Germany. I mean, that girl would never go to Germany without this. The youth change. So for me, that one girl changing is enough. Think of all the lives that are going to be changed with it. And so I think that's why I say I think it's important that these theories are embedded, and they are, but they're played out incredibly well in the program.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's such a joy to hear you. Everybody, I'm just looking at all of the faces. One of the key performance indicators for Pardon's Possibility is shining eyes. Our eyes are shining in response to what we've heard. I do want to give, we've got a few more minutes, but I do want to give Santiago another opportunity, because we're not hearing lots of other comments from people, although there are a few principals who have just kind of shared some of their thoughts. So Shafiq said, it's true, Michael, the business partner sharpening us as principals to understand the immense power we possess as headmasters is in changing the community. And then Cherie, who used to be a partner, is now one of the senior leaders in the education department, says PFP still sharpens me today, 4 years after having participated in the program. So Solly, we are capturing this video and we will be sharing it with the education departments, and we're going to ask you to help us share it with the education department. But Santiago, you've got another whatever period of time you want to use with some thoughts. I have contracted this with Jenny and Michael that we may give Santiago a little bit more time. So over to you.
How many minutes do I have, Luis? I want to stick to availability of time.
You've got 8 minutes.
Oh my, that sounds generous. Okay, I'll try to be shorter because I would love to open room for more participation from other colleagues. Let me speak to the issue of leadership right now. Professor Jansen brought it up, Jenny talked about it, Michael talked about it, and I want to offer a perspective on leadership that brings together these ideas of educational change and social movement, etc. Marshall Gans, a phenomenal scholar of social movements from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, defines leadership as follows. He says, leadership is accepting responsibility to help others, to enable others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. I will say it again. It's accepting responsibility to enable others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. And what better definition of leadership for these times? These are times of huge uncertainty. And I think both Professor Jansen and Jenny and Michael just spoke to the huge demands emotionally and intellectually that the pandemic is putting on the shoulders of school principals. They're heroes. They're doing heroic work right now, and they are doing the work of under impossible circumstances to bring people together and achieve shared purpose. That's what leadership is about. We're about to publish a chapter on leadership to liberate learning that will speak about these 3 core ideas that I want to leave with you today. But I think there are 3 major roles that school leaders and leaders in general can play to liberate learning. So that while dealing with the crazy emergency that many leaders are having to do, they can also help build the future. Not only about being reactive about what's happening outside, but how do we create a common purpose that ignites our intrinsic motivation to work together towards a laudable goal, about a shared purpose. 3 roles to keep in mind. The first one is to become the lead learner, someone who creates the conditions for everybody in the group to learn while participating as learner in the process of figuring out solutions. That's it. That's in a nutshell what research about effective school leadership tells us. The most effective school leaders learn alongside their teachers. That's our first role, to become lead learners, people who create the conditions for everybody to learn while learning alongside them about what's working and what isn't. Again, it's not about being the boss, it's about being the leader. And being the leader is about influencing others so that they do the work you're asking them to do, not because they have to, but because they want to. So becoming a lead learner would be the first part of the work. The second one, becoming a master strategist. Strategy, according to Marshall Gans, is how do you turn what you have into what you need to get at what you want? How do we turn what we have into what we need to get what we want? It is about resourcefulness. It is not necessarily about resources. It's not necessarily about money. It is about capitalizing on the resources that are available, the capital, as Michael was mentioning, the capital that's available in our community, in our group and beyond, to mobilize it in the service of a common purpose. That's how social movements operate. Social movements have limited money, but what they do is to capitalize actually on the most widely available resource that's available to everybody as humans. Even Ivan Illich, the author of Deschooling Society, used to say that the single most equally distributed resource amongst us human folks is our capacity to act. And that's available to everybody, Nobody can take that away from us. And it's equally distributed. That's part of the resource that we need to leverage and tap into, because it's been so untapped and so underutilized in the ways we have been thinking about how to improve schools, trying to get people to do what we tell them to do, rather than working alongside them to create solutions that none of us knew existed, right? None of the parts knew existed. So develop good strategy, which is, again, look into the resources you have and convert them into the resources you need to get what you want. That's the second role. And the third role is the practice of public narrative. In current times, in challenging times, we need to remember that the work of leaders is not only to mobilize the hands of the people they interact with. You need to mobilize three things: the head, the heart, and the hands. It's those three things that you need to mobilize. And so much of the work that I've seen kind of going on around leadership development basically try to convince the head of the principles. You're saying, this is what evidence tells us about what effective practice is. You don't get people to move simply by showing them the evidence, not only by convincing them rationally. You need also to engage their hearts, to ignite their imagination and their willingness to do things differently. And there's a very powerful practice of leaders of social movements that helps do that. And that's the practice of public narrative, which is basically the practice of crafting your own story, the story of self. What brings you to this moment? What brings you to the work you're doing? What's the personal story that connects you to your purpose? Then connecting that with a wider story, which is the story of us. How does my personal story connects to a larger us that can mobilize towards a common purpose? And finally, the story of now, which is the story of the urgent challenge we need to tackle together. What's the urgent action we need to take right now to move towards shared purpose? That's a very well-developed area of study in the field of social movements. I don't think we have known enough about it. I don't think we have used it enough in the educational field, but I think that's one of the powerful things to look into and to try to cultivate more intentionally. How to develop public story, public narrative, to basically ignite the kind of emotions that can overcome the emotions that maintain the status quo: fear, apathy, hopelessness, and how to infuse instead the emotions that propel us to act: hope, anger, the sense that you can make a difference, solidarity, care. Story can do phenomenal things to make that happen. So those three things: lead learning, become a master strategist, learn how to convert what you have into what you need to get what you want, and be more proactive about building your story and making it public and share it with a wider us, and articulate a particular now that we all need to converge around. Sorry, only 10 seconds left for the 8 minutes.
No, that's fine. I wanted to say to you, Santiago, it sounded to me when you describe those three things as if you are describing the core of our work. And this is what is so exciting for me from a practitioner, is that that's the work we've been attempting to do. Not always successfully, but that's been at the heart of it. I want to just end with a difficult question, Santiago, and I'm using every minute that we have with you. The challenge with our work is that it needs to be funded, and many funders want to see improvement in grade 3 literacy outcomes, and then we'll fund you. So don't give us this nonsense around agency and people and all that stuff, because we want the hard numbers that we can, what's your response to that? So how do we measure the impact, evaluate this work? The reason why we published the book is because we felt we needed to tell the stories, and it is part of the public narrative conversation. But just your thoughts, because you did say to me that you had some thoughts around maybe there are some things that could be measured in a different way?
So two things. I think the question of evaluation has kind of the dark side and the bright side. And I think there's merit to the request from donors and partners to say, okay, but we need, measurable results on student outcomes. I think there are two things to do. The first one is I see partnerships for possibility as making the ground more fertile for anything else to come up, just to fertilize the ground. That's what you're doing. You're enhancing, redistributing social capital, as Michael was saying. You are creating the environment where very powerful things can happen and thrive. So I think that's one of the things that you can start by doing. Just measure the fertility of the ground before and after the introduction, the sense of collective efficacy amongst the principal and their schools. Collective efficacy is the strongest predictor right now of student outcomes. Collective efficacy is fundamentally the shared belief in a group about their capacity to produce good results. That's one of the things you can do. Capture some of the engagement and commitment of students and parents and teachers to their work. Do it before and after, those kind of things. So take the kind of measures that allow you to see that the ground that you're building is more fertile. And that's probably your role. Your role might not be to improve student outcomes, but to create the fertile ground that allows for student outcomes to emerge. The provocation that I want to leave here, though, is there are ways in which we can produce powerful work that has a more intentional effect on student learning. And it's not about putting your efforts into try to improve the standardized test scores. I think that would be the wrong way to think about it. But how about being more intentional about impacting intentionally the pedagogical core? What are ways in which we can partner, nurture partnerships between business leaders and principals that have an intentional effect on the interaction that happens between teachers and students in the presence of knowledge. To improve that, don't think about improving outcomes, but think about creating conditions for powerful learning in the classroom, and so that your partnership is translating into what's happening in the desk of the student who is working there every day. If you do that, I can promise you in 2-3 years, you'll see remarkable improvements in student outcomes without even paying attention to the test scores. So more intentional connection to the pedagogical core, so that knowing that you cannot affect it directly, but you can affect it intentionally through strategy. And I think that can be a phenomenal area of learning for both sides, for the principal and for the business leaders as well. So those are the two things: measure the fertility of the ground, but also develop a more intentional link between your actions and what happens on the everyday life of students when they are engaging with knowledge.
So Santiago, I will be talking to your publisher about doing a formal book launch of your book. And that will be another reason for us to have you in our conversation and in our broader conversation specifically about this idea of liberating learning and pedagogical core. Thank you so much for you. We don't have more opportunity for a wider conversation, but people have been hanging off your every word, your words. I want to give Prof. Janssen and Jenny and Michael a final opportunity to just share. Santiago, did you want to say something else? No. Santiago, so Jonathan, Jenny, and then Michael. Prof. Janssen, did you want to say something? Last final thoughts from you? So it doesn't look, it looks as he's not with us right now. Let's go to Jenny and then Michael.
So no, I think we've said a lot already. So in a snapshot, that just the extraordinary journeys that everybody has been on during this time, if not other times anyway, is just a celebration. What we're doing for our students, for our communities during COVID, but also through everyday journeys, as you say, Louise, we are changing the country from the ground up through our beautiful children, and it needs magnificent celebration, and I don't think we do that often enough. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And then last thoughts from Michael.
I mean, there's a lot said. I think with Santiago, I agree with him, that idea of, and we talked about this when I was down there, that idea of assessment, the things that you're doing aren't going to be able to be assessed like how the world wants them assessed, you know, and that standardized assessment, et cetera. And so I think when Santiago talked about building that fertile ground, meeting the needs of students, meeting the needs of principals, building confidence in that community, he's right. In the future, those test scores will come up. So I think you were, and one thing I liked about the program is it didn't try to cover so many things. It focused in on one area and did a good job with the principals. And so I think that you need to continue to do. And I believe in the next years, you'll see those testing increases come about. But some of the schools that you're dealing with, they're very, very difficult. And you know, I went to the one and I thought, you know, how can you expect these students to do well in test scores when the conditions that they're living in, you know? And so I think you can't just jump. You know, a lot of these programs come in from the outside and they want to leapfrog. They want to leapfrog over certain things and develop these improvements. This is going to take time. You know, the system didn't get the way it was in you know, 2-3 years. It's going to take time, but building that soil, like you said, I think is very good. And you're doing a great job with it.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. This has been an unbelievable. I was so excited about today, and it met all my expectations. We will be doing the clips. We'll be sharing them. We'll be sharing with you information about how to buy copies of the book. If you want to share any final thoughts in the chat, we will be reading all of the chat notes. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us, and specific thank you for Santiago, Michael, Jenny, and Prof. Janssen. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And Jenny, sleep well.
Do you want to stay connected for a few minutes, Luis, just for a wrap up and debrief?
I'd love to,
okay.
Santiago, and I'm sure there are a few members of our team who would also love to if they know. So it would be great to just do a quick.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say a personal thank you before I do go to bed, Louise. It's lovely to see you again, Santiago. And
likewise, Jenny. Always great to see you. Take good care.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, and please sleep well. Get a glass of warm milk. I'm sure it's going to help you.
See you later.
Thank you. So, Santiago, I also wanted to introduce you to Kamala Pillay. Kamala has just taken over from me as the program director for Partners for Possibility. And
wonderful.
I don't know whether you wanted to share your face and just so that Santiago can get a sense of who he's. So Kamala's hiding behind her picture at the moment. Yeah, so Santiago, I mean, you saw the response. People absolutely loved hearing you speak, and I'd love to do a webinar just now that people have got a sense, because I've been talking about you, nobody knew what I was talking about. Now that they've got a sense of you, do you think we could get Routledge to do a kind of virtual book launch with us and just create some time to get more awareness of this idea of liberating learning? It fits very beautifully into a piece of work that the Department of Basic Education is doing in South Africa around project-based learning. So they're really pushing that hard. And for me, what you are doing is exactly linked to that piece of work, which is it's supported all the way from the top of the Department of Education.
Yeah, you know, so first, thank you so much. It is, as you can imagine, it is just very moving to feel that the ideas that one has to share resonate with people, especially people doing good work. You know, I would feel worried if it was charter schools or other movements that feel appealed by these ideas. But knowing that it's folks that are engaged in